Okay, so never save anything to the desktop, never save anything to the C drive. If you look in like documents, that may put you in the C drive. Do not save anything there. When the computer reboots, that information is gone forever, okay? Even if you think it's temporary, you're just going to copy your file to the desktop, work on it, and then drag it off. Don't, because if the computer crashes, your files are gone. So you have a P drive on these computers that is your temporary storage. It's not protected. Anyone could come in there and delete it, but it will be there when you reboot, okay? Should be there when you reboot. Someone might delete it. So you're going to make a new folder. If you have me for a previous class, you can use the same folder you had before. If not, you're just going to make a new folder, and you're going to label it your last name underscore F17. So for me, Sarcona underscore F17. Okay, so make a new folder on your P drive, label it your last name underscore F17. Inside that folder, make a brand new folder called 2540. So new whether you've had me today or not, you will still need to make a 2540 folder. Now in Cinema and other 3D applications, they do not handle their organization as well as Maya. Maya is actually able to organize folders for us. Okay, so in Cinema, what we would do is create our own folder structure. We don't need to do that. Maya will handle all that work for us. Okay, so we are good with this area here. Now, before we move on to the next step, we're going to jump back to the P drive, and you should see in your P drive a Maya folder. Okay, your P drive has a Maya folder. This is where your preferences are. It may have it, it may not have it. If nobody's opened Maya on that computer, it won't have it. Okay. Inside the Maya folder, you'll see that there is probably a 2018 folder in there. Okay. If you have a 2018 folder in there, you can delete it. If you were in a previous class, you can leave the 2018 folder if you already have it. Okay? Otherwise, delete the 2018 folder. Whoops. I don't know what I hit. Yes, sir. Yep. And what that's doing is it's deleting the preferences for Maya. Okay, now we can open Maya up. For this class, we're going to be using Maya 2018. Eventually, we'll be getting into an Arnold renderer, or not Arnold, but a RenderMan renderer. Initially, we'll be using RenderMan. Initially, we'll be using Arnold. Eventually, we'll be using RenderMan. Okay, if you get this message, you probably won't. You'll create default preferences. They're ahead of the game. It's just like cars, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, one of Maya's biggest strengths is its animation tools. There's a lot of times people will model in another package, and then they'll bring it into Maya and do the animation inside there. Okay, not that Maya doesn't have good modeling tools, but some tools like, it hurts me to say this, like CATIA or Unigraphics can model stuff more accurately than Maya can. Okay, Maya is a visualization tool. It's not meant to be like the end game for modeling. So if you want something perfect and accurate, that's where you would typically model something. Most of the time we don't care. Cool. I'm just double clicking my window. For whatever reason, mine always comes in like off center, so I have to double click the window so I can see the whole thing. And I'll blame the projector. You may get a pop-up like the one I have here. You can say don't show this at startup because that's annoying, and then hit OK. Cool. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to set up our preferences. Okay. So it's going to be a little bit of a review for the people who have already been through this earlier today. I lost one of my pointers. this up here is your menu bar that you would see inside of Maya. Okay, you've seen this inside of other software packages as well. This menu bar is where you would typically go if you're going to edit stuff like meshes and curves and surfaces and whatever else. But what's crazy about it is you can also go here to this drop down and you can change that menu bar. So in Cinema, you saw one menu bar. In Maya, you can actually change that menu bar based on what you're going to be doing in the software. So if we're rigging, typically you'll be in the rigging one. If we're animating, typically we'll be in the animation one. Okay. Now the kicker for all of these is I never really go up there to use that. Okay. Hover your mouse in the center of your screen and then hold down the space bar. Okay. So this thing that popped up is every menu item that's available. Okay, so we don't have to worry about going up there and changing the menu so much. It's all going to be in us just using what's called the hot box, this menu bar that pops up. Now if you were just to tap it, you'll see how that taps it, and now we have 4 different views. Okay, and then based on where our mouse is and we tap it again, it'll get us into that view. So if I'm over here in the top, you can see the word top right there. If I'm over the top window and I tap the space bar, it'll get me into the top view, okay, or the front view, or the side view, or back to perspective. Okay, so very quickly we can jump between all of these different views simply by tapping the space bar. Okay. Up here at the very top right, you can change your workspace too. So as I'm tapping the space bar, that's giving me like 4 views. That's part of my viewport layout, part of my workspace layout. I can customize it. I can change it to one of these presets. I could have several different things going on. I could share them with a friend if I wanted to. Most of the time, I don't really play with those. I leave those exactly as they are. There's no real need for me to go in there and start tweaking those things. This right here is the status bar, this bar that comes across. It has a lot of options eventually we'll get to. Right now we don't need to worry too much about those types of things. It has some stuff like new file, open, save, undo, redo. Okay. It also has, in my case, I have my license activated, so I have my license right here. It has some other stuff there that eventually we'll click on. This is going to be, in my opinion, a game changer for most software packages. Okay, Maya's had this since the beginning, and nobody seems to want to adopt it. It's called a shelf, and it allows you to save stuff that you commonly would want to use. Okay, so in this class, in animation class, there are some things that we will be using similar to modeling class, and some things that will be different based on what we're going to be doing. Okay. So some of these modeling class people, if you were already added these, you can just ignore this part if you already have them. If you don't have them, then add them. Okay. So we want to add stuff to our shelf. So you're going to click on this custom shelf right here. That's the blank one. And we're going to add some custom stuff to that shelf. So you're going to hold down the Control and Shift key. Okay. And then you're going to go add something. Now watch mine first because I don't want anyone to do this wrong. I'm holding Control Shift. I go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. It looks like nothing happened. Okay? But what actually happened is if I let go with my left hand and I click into my viewport, it added a button to my shelf. Now the reason I have people watch me first is because usually people go here and they say, it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. Oh, there it is. And then they end up with that. Okay? So hold Control Shift, Edit, Delete by Type, History. Just get 1 in there. And I'm just going to delete all my history button things here. Cool. Yes, sir. Delete by type. It's in the middle-ish. I think you're under File. There you go. And then delete by type, history. Yep. That's it. So now just click off of it. Cool. All right, everyone's good so far? Cool. All right, so now we're going to add a one called center pivot. So we still hold Control Shift. Now we go under Modify and go to Center Pivot. Okay. While we're in that same menu, hold Control Shift and add Freeze Transformations. Should be good in that window. Cool. Hold Control Shift, go to Window Outliner. Window here and then outliner there. Okay, good. We should have 4 right now. Yes, okay. Keep holding Control Shift. Under the animation editors, we're going to add the graph editor, the dope sheet, and I'm just going to see what this time editor is. That looks like a new thing. I'll have to play with that. I will have to play with that. All right. So now we should have 6 in here. Yes, sir.
Oh, we got 4.
Window animation editor. And then graph editor and dope sheet. All right, so these are common things that we are going to be using pretty much throughout every single assignment, okay? We'll get into history, we'll get into what these other ones will do, but for now we'll just leave them. Now I want to customize or change the name of that tab. That way it's not custom, that way it makes more sense to what it is. So if you click on the little gear on the far left and you go to Shelf Editor, then you can just rename custom to your last name _ shelf. Okay, so your last name _ shelf is where you're going to rename that. Just a little point about the shelf editor. Everything inside of Maya is basically a command. Okay, so like when you go to Photoshop and you go to here and here and you do whatever it is, that command is written inside of Photoshop itself. Okay, we can never physically see what that command is and what it's doing. Maya is not like that. Every single thing that it does, it's basically this major program here, and when I do delete history, it goes into this folder, grabs the delete history command and runs it. And then when it does the center pivot, it grabs the center pivot command and then runs it. Okay? So that means that all of those commands that we have up there, literally everything in Maya, is somewhere on our hard drive. So that's something we could actually go in and edit if we wanted to, because it's all just like plain text stuff. We typically don't edit them, but what we could do is we could actually stack stuff together. So if we find that we're doing the same, let's say 3 or 4 things in a row, we could take those 3 or 4 things and put them into a brand new item that we put inside of our shelf, right? So imagine that like in Illustrator, there's the width tool. So typically I'll use the width tool, I'll add some more lines, add width tool, and I start blending stuff together. And sometimes I go to this key command where it's like click this button, then click this button, then click this button. And I do it like every single time, those 3 things over and over again. Well, in Maya, I can take those 3 commands and stick them into a button on my shelf, and then I have 1 click, and it does all 3 for me. Okay? So eventually we'll get into this area where you will see, hey, I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. I want to be able to save that and put that into my shelf. Okay? So this is our starting point. This is definitely not our ending point. By the end of the semester, you should have more stuff on there. Okay? Cool. And just so you can see it, if I go to the command here, that's the command it's running for delete history. Okay? So if I was to go to the Windows browser and I search for delete history, it would most likely find a file called delete history that Maya's calling. Okay? And I can actually see like words that says what it's doing. So I'm going to save my shelf. Cool. All right. So now we have this area here. These are all of our move, rotate, scale tools on the left. Okay. So Cinema, they were up top. These ones are on the left. They moved, or they didn't move, but they have adjusted keyframes. So W in Maya is your move tool. I did do save all shelves, yeah. W in Maya is your move tool. E is your rotate, and R is your scale. Those are on your hotkey sheet, okay? The ones that are on your hotkey sheet are the ones you're going to typically use most while in Maya. Maybe not specifically for animation, but for overall animation or overall Maya usage. Okay, so W, E, R. Q is a selection tool. What you'll find with Maya versus Cinema is that the selection is not based on a specific tool. In Cinema, I have to be in the selection tool to select stuff. In Maya, you don't, okay? You don't need to do this right now, but I'm just going to show you. If I were to go to the Move tool, I can click on stuff and move it. I can go to the Rotate tool and rotate stuff. I can deselect and scale and click off and click on. In Cinema, you could not do that. U2 and back there. Look at this new thing that they've added into Maya.
Oh my God.
Do you remember last semester when we built a gear? And you can customize it. Look at all those options there. Okay? It's been a long time since they've actually updated any of the presets in Maya, and that's like an amazing one. We spent, what, a whole week modeling that. All right. So these are your tools. Now, everything in Maya is pretty much customizable or has options to it, okay? So if I double click on anything over here, it brings up options or settings, okay? So how we move stuff is not just a direct thing. I don't just grab something and move it. There's certain ways I may want to move something, especially in animation. Okay, if I move the ball up like this, that's no big deal, right? If I rotate it and then I move it, do you see how the move tool is still facing the same direction? Right? So I can change this instead of orienting to the world, which it is right now, I can orient it to the object. And so now it's going to move that way. Okay? So that could be an easy way for us to get something to move in the direction that we want, as opposed to trying to move it the other way, which was like this. Okay? So we have more options than that here. We can constrain things, we can snap things, you can do a whole bunch of stuff inside this window too. Rotate has one, scale has one, the select tool has one. Everything in Maya is pretty much customizable to a point. Okay? All right. So I just want to point that out. The center pivot? No. This allows, well, it does allow us to move it, but it's not accurate. Okay? So if I were just to rotate it like this, and then I went here and I rotated that, there's nothing saying it's going to be exactly where it needs to be lined up with that axis. Okay? Down here, these are just your different layouts. Okay? I typically don't use those, but if you needed to for some point, every once in a while you get lost in Maya and you just need to reset your workspace, right? So you can just go over here and click on one of these and it'll get you back to where typically you are. Down here is our timeline. We're going to spend a lot of time in the timeline. Range slider, we'll get into that. This is this is called the Mel scripting area. So remember in the shelf editor I said there's that command that it's running? I could actually type in that command right here and it'll run that command. Okay? So if I type in sphere and hit enter, it creates a sphere. Now this is a NURB sphere. In Maya they have different kinds of objects. Oops. There we go. And this is a polygon sphere. Okay? So using that little command line down here, you can also enter things into that to get stuff created. Now where that becomes useful is there are resources online where you can actually download scripts you can drop them into Maya and use those scripts for different things. Not just specifically, modeling things or just utilities, but like amazing things. Maya scripts, Creative Crash. Creative Crash is a huge website. It used to be High-End 3D. Then they changed it to Creative Crash, and now it's back to High-End 3D. I don't know why they do this, just to mess with me, I guess. But what they do have in here, which is pretty cool, there's one that was called RockGen, and for years I used it. And basically you type in RockGen in that little, you download the script, put it in your folder, type in RockGen, and this little interface comes up, and you can say I need 25 different sized rocks, and you hit OK, and you get 25 different sized rocks. It was pretty amazing. And you can pick whether you want boulders, or you want quartz, or you want stalagmites. It was pretty awesome. But look at here, you can search by things like animation. So you can see, here's all these different animation scripts. So sometimes you may find something that you're like, I can't figure out how to do this thing. Someone may have already written a script for it because that process is so complex. One of those, one of them is this free tank tread maker. Okay. Now the cool thing with this is if I told you to animate tank tread, you would be like, I don't know how to animate tank tread because it's supposed to go, like in this case, look at that crazy pattern. How am I supposed to animate that and then animate all these other things? With this one, you create a curve, you grab your shape, you hit go, and then it duplicates it along that path, and then you can hit the play button and it'll animate automatically along that thing. Okay? Huge time saver. In this class, we're not going to get into how to create these things, but it's important to know that they're out there because you may want to animate a full-blown character but not know how to do something like that. Okay? So use these sources. Yes, ma'am.
First, are they free? And second, is there any chance that I'd be grabbing something to mess me up? Like virus? No, somebody write something bad.
There's always a possibility that there could be a virus. I've never had one from here. Okay? Number two, most of them are free. There are some ones that people charge for. The only issue you would ever have with something like this downloading is if we look right here, this is when it was last modified, 4 years ago. Okay? So we're on Maya 2018. 4 years ago, we were on Maya something else. That script may still not run. That RockGen one worked perfect in version 3. By the time I used it in version 2010, it just stopped working. Okay? So it's all based on that script. Okay? Even the programming language has changed some. Maya used to use its own language, Maya Embedded Language, MEL or MEL. Now it has Python, so people can use Python scripting and MEL scripting together. But it all depends on download it, try it, see if it works. Okay? This one here is pretty awesome too. This guy Davies, he has all of these things. This is a free Lego generator. I don't think anyone in here took my intro class when our final exam, it was, yeah, Patty did. When it was Legos, right? That was our final exam. And here it is, free Lego generator, right? But this guy Davies has a whole bunch of them. So he does, and you'll see, here's compatibility version 8. That's like crazy long ago. What? Free downloads. He has a free escalator generator, a free car rigging thing, free gear generator. We don't need that anymore. Steel, stairs, nuts and bolts, pistons, windows, chains, springs. So he made all of these scripts and allows people to go in there and you open the window and it's like, what kind of stairs do you want? Pick this, pick this, pick this, and then you go okay, and then there's the stairs. All right? From a modeling perspective, if you're in the modeling class, you would not use any of that stuff because your job as a modeler is to learn how to model things. And when you turn in a modeling demo reel, you want to be able to say, this is all my stuff. When you turn in an animation reel, you have a lot of flexibility in that because part of the animation is rigging. So the tread generator, if you're going to be a rigger, you would not use the tread generator in your reel because that's rigging. The fact of how you animated it, that's animation. Okay? You'll see the difference as we get further on and we actually start separating rigging from animation. But just be aware of what you're putting into your demo reel and what you're putting into your own work. I'm trying to see which one. I don't know. I'm not sure which one is the most recent. Oh, newest. That's the top. There we go. So yeah, so this one is 2007 still, yeah. So these may work. They may not work. There's other stuff out here that's much newer, but I know Davy's stuff used to work a long time ago. It's fantastic. All right, so that's the Mel script window. This area right here is the command line. So if you make a boo-boo, Maya will let you know. Yellow means there might be something wrong. Red means something probably went wrong that's horrible. In Maya, red can be treated as a yellow pretty much because it is like, it might be horrible, it might not be. You just have to wait and find out. Way below this, at the very bottom, this is your help line. So as you hover over stuff, it will show you what this is here, perform high-level timing and animation. Down here, it says the same thing, okay, as whatever that help line is. Now, where it becomes more helpful than that is when you go to a tool. So if I went to modeling, I went to mesh tools, and I said append. Down here, it would tell me what it wants me to do. It's giving me basically a step-by-step direction as to how to use that tool. Okay? So just be aware of it. Most of the time you shouldn't need it, but sometimes you do. That's a script editor. We'll get into that later. Okay, so click on the little running dude on the far right, being chased by a gear. Okay, these are your preferences. For every class, I'm maintaining the same preferences, so we're not going to be changing anything different from the modeling class. Okay, so if you had your stuff in the modeling class set up, you don't have to reset it up. It's the same stuff. All right, so just to see at the very top of this, if you go to interface, it says menu set modeling. It has some information about color. Remember that little box that popped up at the beginning that said, do you want to highlight all the new features of Maya? That's where you can choose the color if you want to change your color or just turn that off. Skip down to settings. Okay, on your little cheat sheet, our animations that we're doing are 30 frames per second. Okay? So we want to make sure that in our settings here, we change our frames per second to 30 frames per second. Okay, you'll notice we get a little red flag at the bottom when we change it to 30 frames a second. Ignore the little flag. It doesn't really do anything. Somewhere in a script, somewhere that it called, there was an error, just letting us know. Notice how our units are centimeter. In animation, it's not going to play a huge role in how big our scale is. Okay, when we do lighting and stuff, it'll play a bigger role, or texturing, but we don't have to worry about it too much. Also notice that the axis is our up axis is Y. Some softwares it's Z, like if you're dealing with anything CAD related. Typically, a lot of those packages have Z up, and then you can change it here or there. If you get a model from a CAD package and you need to rotate it, just rotate it. It's no big deal. Animation. Shouldn't need to play with anything in here. I just want to point out a couple things. These right here where it says the default tangents, we're leaving them at auto for now, but at some point we could tweak those and change what the default tangents are. Okay? Everyone here has had After Effects before or used After Effects before. Okay? In After Effects, you hit keyframe and you get a linear keyframe, right? That's like the default one. In Maya, you can actually specify what your default is. All right? For initially, we're just going to leave it at the default auto, and then we'll customize it later. Also note up here, Maya is not an auto keying program. That means that every time we want to make a change, we have to set a new keyframe. So if we want something to move, we go here and set a key, we go here and set a key, we go here and set a key. Okay, and then Maya will do all the blending for us but we have to tell it at each point when we want to set a key. Okay? That should be good there. Files and projects. Okay, so go down to the files and projects area. In this spot, you can specify to enable auto-saving. Okay, so when you start working on your projects, you may find that your computer is crashing more than you like it. It's going to happen. Every day your computer may crash. I've had it where Maya crashes consistently every like 2 minutes. Okay, it just happens based on your project, based on what you're doing, based on how your computer is feeling that day, everything. So if you click on this enable, it'll actually enable your Maya to autosave. So in this case, it's set to 10 minutes right there. Every 10 minutes, it'll automatically save your file wherever it's at. Okay? It's a very handy feature, especially sometimes people walk away from their computers and forget to save their stuff. Somebody else comes in and accidentally hits the power button or whatever, or the computer just crashes. Okay? So it's always good to have that interval set up if you're worried about that kind of thing. Now, the number here, 10 minutes may be overkill. Like every 10 minutes, it's going to pop up and say, I'm saving, and then you hit OK. It says, I'm saving, and you hit OK. So you may want to set this to maybe 30 minutes or 60 minutes if you use it. However long this is, that's how much work you'd have to redo if you didn't save it. Okay? So if it's 10 minutes and your computer crashes, you may only have to do 10 minutes worth of work again. Otherwise, it might be 60 minutes if you have it set to 60. I do not use this. I just disable it. It's not a huge deal. Most of the stuff that we're going to be doing, initially at least, is going to be simple enough where if you did crash, you'd be able to redo something pretty quickly. Okay? Not initially, not the very first, but eventually you'll be able to get there. Nothing need to worry about here. Go down to selection. Alright, I'm just going to point something out inside here, and that's what's called priority selection. So inside Maya, they have this thing called priority selection. If there's a million objects in your project and you marquee over all of them, it's going to select items based on their priority. Some items have a higher priority than other items. Okay? Just to give you a quick, oh man, what'd that do? Why would I want that? Just to give you a quick example, if I created a sphere, and a sphere, and a sphere, and I marquee over all three of them, they have all the same priority. They're all objects, okay? If I were to create, under the rigging menu, I created a joint, and then I marqueed, you'll see how it's not selecting the spheres anymore, it's selecting that joint. Okay? Because the joints have a higher priority than spheres do. Okay? So just be aware of it. You don't have to change anything, and I would never change any of that stuff. Leave it the way it is, because otherwise it's going to screw stuff up. But it does have a priority. So if you're like doing a marquee 1,000 times, it's not selecting what you want, change your view, zoom in closer, zoom out, change something, and you'll probably be able to get it. Okay? There are some other options up here that you could play with, such as a pick chooser. Keep yours open. I'm just going to save just so you can see what this does. Right. As I hover my mouse over this area, there's two items back to back, right? So I can say, oh, I want 2 or I want 3. So you could set that up too. That's more of an annoyance to me. I would rather just be able to marquee that one and grab exactly what I want. But again, knowing that these things are there is the idea, okay? At some point, I would go through those and at least kind of look at it and see what some of the things are. You may not understand everything, but at least see what they are. You can even watch tutorials on just the preferences in Maya, okay? You can even ignore selection priority if you wanted to. All right, snapping we don't have to worry about. Time slider should be good. We can make the time slider bigger. Right now it's like this tiny, okay? For some of you that might be difficult to see, especially when we get 1,000 frames in our stuff. We're gonna have keyframes like that close together, and there'll be like so much stuff going on in there you can't see it. So you may want to adjust that. So you can change the height and make this bigger if you want to. You can also take the key ticks and adjust their size as well. You'll see what those are. That should be it. Oh, playback speed. Now this one is different than the modeling one. Our playback speed when we hit this play button on the far right is how fast it's going to play through. So right now it's set to play every frame, and the maximum playback speed is set to free. So what that means is it's going to play back every single frame as fast as it can. Now this could be dangerous for an animator because what could happen is it might be able to play back at 100 frames a second. And we do all of our animation at 100 frames a second. And then when we go and take it in After Effects, everything is like super slow because we thought it was playing back a lot faster than it was. Okay? So we always want to make sure that we're previewing our stuff at a real time. So under max playback speed, set this to 30 frames per second times 1. I'm not sure why they have these times 1, 0.5, and 2. They didn't have that before. It was just like half speed, double speed, or real time. All right. So max playback time, 30 frames per second times 1. So that means that if it can play back at 700 frames a second, it's only going to play back at 30. Okay? So we'll never go faster than we think. Undos will be the last one that we will go to. So Maya has a limit of the amount of undos you can do by default. It's set to 50. Instead of Control Z, which is what every other program is, it's just Z inside Maya. So you don't have to use your pinky when you hit undo. Okay, you can just hit your index finger a lot. 50 times. So when you select something, you unselect it, you select it again, you grab a point, you select something else. Every single one of those is an undo. So 50 is not actually a large number because by the time you've gone through and selected a bunch of stuff and moved stuff, you're like way far away from where you may want to be. So as a beginner, I may want to set that to 200. Okay? You can set it to infinite, but it may slow your station down incredibly. All right, I'm going to leave mine at 50 because I don't care. Dun, 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 dun. All right, so that should be that. Hit save. All right. So now we have our shelf that we've created. We have our preferences that we've set up. Now I need to go to File and save my preferences. Okay, so just go to File and save your preferences. Now the reason we're doing this, remember that 2018 folder we deleted at the beginning? That was basically just temporarily being updated while we were doing these things. It's not until we do save preferences that those actually get written into those folders and saved. Okay, so if Maya were to have crashed before I did that, my shelf would be gone and my preferences would be gone and I have to reset those things up again. Okay, so just a precaution. All right, so now we need our folder structure. So now we need to start creating this nice little folder structure that we can use. So under File, go to Project Window. And you'll probably find that your keyboard has decided to not work anymore. You have to hit the New button. Okay, so on the far right of that project window, hit New. And you're going to call it your last name underscore playing. Playing. It was be playing around. Then you. Yes, yes. And then under the folder, find your P drive folder. So find your 2540 folder. Okay, so I have Sarcona underscore playing as my project name. For the location, I have my P drive Sarcona F17 2540 folder. All right, so in our days of cinema, when we used After Effects, if we were creating a web page or any of that stuff, we have to make all of our own folders for us. Maya will do that automatically, okay, which is amazing. We only use a couple of these folders, but it creates all of them because Maya will use those at random points throughout our workflow. So scenes is where we're going to save all of our scenes. So when we save this file, it'll actually be dropped into a scenes folder, okay? I don't use assets. Images is where it's going to render stuff out. So when we click the render button, all of our images will automatically go into that folder. Any images we bring into Maya for like textures or whatever else will go into source images. And then the rest of these you can pretty much ignore for now. Eventually we'll use sound. Maybe we'll use movies. If you had autosave set up, it'll use the autosave folder. Okay, so you can just hit accept. Alright, so now we have our project folder created. Alright, stay where you are in Maya. I'm just going to show you what that just did. So here's my 2540 folder. This is what Maya created, Sarcona_playing. When I go into that folder, there's all those folders that it said it was going to create. Okay, and in some of them, like cache, you'll see that it creates extra folders. Some of these Maya will never use. Okay, if I don't use Bifrost, it will not populate anything in that folder. But when I do use it, anything Bifrost related goes into that folder. Okay, now it's important eventually when you get into using that kind of stuff, you know where things are, because this folder, it's probably minuscule now, like a K or something, 2.7 kilobytes. This 2.7 kilobyte folder can definitely bloat up to being gigabytes. I've had one student's folder that was 60 gigabytes just because of dynamics that were written to it. Okay, so we just have to be aware that if we go into here and we go into our scenes, and you're like, I have one file, where's all this stuff? Most likely it's from something else hidden inside one of these other folders. Okay, cool. All right, so what we want to do is we want to animate some stuff inside here. Now, when we changed our time frame rate from 24 to 30, it does this every time, 1.25. You see how it has like some funky number there? So just change it back to 1 for both of those numbers. And then I'm also going to grab the square on the end of that slider and just pull it up to 250. Okay? So 1, 1, stretch that out to 250. Okay? Do you see anywhere else that says 1.25? Where is it? Right. So right here on the actual timeline, it says 1.25. So even though we've adjusted the start of our playback, it doesn't actually move the ticker back there. Okay? So if you just hit this back rewind button, it'll take you back to the rewinding. Okay? So now our start frame is at 1. Okay? Now it wouldn't be a huge deal if we did have that. All that's going to happen is our first keyframe is going to be at 1.25, and we can always move it back later. Okay? Do you have a question?
No, I got it.
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's create an object and move it around. So just create a polygon sphere. Okay. So create polygon sphere. If you find you're creating a lot of polygon spheres, then you may want to add it to your shelf. Keep going up.
Do that thing.
See where it says polygon? There you go.
Oh, yeah.
And then sphere. Okay. So now the sphere that we just created is under the grid. It's like half under the grid and half above the grid. It does not matter physically where this item is at, except it will drive me crazy if it's not laying flat on the grid like the grid is an actual ground. Okay? So we want to get it up on top of the grid. You could do this and move it. Right? See how I just moved it up? Is that on top of the grid? No, it almost is, right? I could zoom in, I could turn around, I could try to line it up, but I'm just going to come over here to my translate Y. This is our positional stuff for it, and just type in 1 in the translate Y. The sphere's radius is 1. What does radius mean? What was that? Center out, right? So it's as tall as a sphere is. If the radius is 1, it's double that, right? So it's 2. So if 1 unit is below the ground, I can put that to 1 and get that 1 unit back up, okay? Now, you don't have to know that. I just know that if I put this at 0.5, that didn't work. If I put it at 2, that's too high. And if I know if I put it at 1, that looks pretty dang close, okay? Now here's where rigging can come in. Not that we need to do this. We won't do it for it. Ignore my squishy sphere also, I just realized. All day I've been saying that. I thought I told you that. Ignore the squishy sphere. It's perfectly round here. If I were to change the radius of this, do you see how now my sphere is no longer sitting on the ground, right? So I could create a rig for a sphere that every time I change that radius, it would automatically move my sphere so it's sitting on the ground, okay? You guys will not do this. I will do this just so you can see it. I'm going to do just this, and I will say okay. So now I wrote a little expression. Okay, everything is programming based, right? So I can actually write tiny expressions inside Maya that connect things together very simply. So now if I go to this radius and I middle drag out here, look at how he's sitting perfectly on that grid plane without me having to do anything extra. I don't have to do this and then move it or whatever, okay? Every time I made an item, I would have to do that if I wanted this feature. Or I could just duplicate this item. I can't put that on the shelf though, okay? Because of how it's written, I could write an advanced script for it that would allow me to do that though, okay? Go ahead.
There's nowhere to go and copy and paste the expression?
Yeah, I could, right? I could take that exact expression and copy and paste it. The issue becomes the names. So this is p-sphere 1 and polysphere 1. My next object might be a cube. So then the name's going to be different. It's going to be p cube 1, p cube shape 1, or whatever, okay? Now if I wrote an advanced expression, I could say, click the item, and it would automatically go through and figure out which items need to be connected. Okay? So if I had, I'm not going to do that, because that's like much more involved than that. But I could have it automatically figure out what items it should connect. Okay? And then run a script. Now this is something pretty simple. I could actually, instead of writing a little script, I could do it a different way. Connection editor. Let's see if it's loaded here. No. There we go. So I'm going to take the translate Y here and connect it to the radius that way. Okay. So now I swapped it. So now as I change the translate Y, the radius will get bigger. Okay? So the other way was I make the radius bigger, it sits on the ground. Now I can change the Y and it'll make the radius bigger. So see how I just move it up and it's automatically scaling it up and scaling it down. Okay? Now I could do that either way. I could actually have different ways that I control this thing. But the idea is not that you would ever really need something like this specifically. The idea is that we can connect stuff together. This is the rigging part. Okay? This is how we can set stuff up so that stuff is easier to animate, right? You have this is the perfect example. You have a mechanical device, right? So let's say you have something that just like opens like this. There's 35 gears that cause that thing to open like that. There's arms and stuff that go and move and do whatever. You wouldn't want to animate all of these things at the same time. You want to try to animate them. You'd want to rig it so that when you do grab a single control and move it, that all this stuff automatically happens. Okay? So think of like an actual like robotics type thing where you're actually figuring out how stuff moves and making it move. Okay, that's what rigging is. And this is just like kids play when it comes to rigging. Okay, so we'll just reset this back to 1 and 1. He's back on the ground. He's happy. Cool. All right. We have. Oops, come on, get back there. If you look at the manipulator here, you'll see we have red, green, and blue, right? Okay. Red is always going to be which direction? X. And then Y is going to, or green is going to be Y. And then Z will be blue, okay? RGB, XYZ. Those go together, okay? So if you just remember their alphabetical order in RGB and XYZ, perfect. Or you can look down here, the red is X, the X is red, the Y is green, and the blue is Z, or vice versa. All right, so as we animate stuff, we never, ever, ever, ever want to just grab something from the middle and move it, because that moves all three of these, and it becomes very difficult to animate something the way we want to. If I want to create something on an angle, I need to animate it intentionally on an angle, or animate it straight and then rotate it over. Okay, I need to do something else besides just grabbing it randomly and moving it. Okay, so for this specific item, we want to just have him move across the screen. I don't care if you go in the blue or the red, the X or the Z. I just want you to slide him back to the edge of the grid. Okay, so he is all the way on one side of the grid. Now what we want to do is we could animate him from here. But I have an issue. Do you see over there how in my channel box in this area, how I have stuff already like lit up, or not lit up, but different values? I have 1 for my translate Y and 11 point whatever for my translate Z. You may have different values, that's fine. I don't like to start animating when I have these crazy values inside there. I want a fresh start basically, okay? So when I start animating, I know this is where I started and then I went from here, okay? So that's what freeze transform does. So remember we added that shelf button freeze transform? So we're going to click on our object and we're going to hit freeze transform. And then you see what happens to those values in the channel box. They went away. They should have gone away. All right, now you may get an error. So just by seeing a couple screens, I can see that some people are getting an error when they're hitting freeze transform. The error message says, cannot do this because there are incoming connections. That means that something is already controlling X, Y, Z, or one of their values, okay? Do you see over there how my outliner has this red streak going down it? That means I accidentally set a key, or I set a key. Maybe it wasn't accidental, okay? So before it lets me freeze transform, I need to delete those keyframes out. So if I just highlight all of these, right click and say delete, those keyframes go away, then freeze transform will work. Okay? Yep, so it says this is my 0, 0. All right, so we have this, all these are 0, those are 1, visibility's on. So now we can start to animate this. So the way we want to animate this, just to play around with a little bit, we're going to start it here, and we're going to end it straight across the way. Okay, just one keyframe, another keyframe. Some software is auto key, right, like I said, so you automatically sets keyframes. Maya is not. We have to tell it every time we want a keyframe. So make sure we're at frame 1, which I am. I'm at frame 1. I'm going to animate this going across. So I'm going to hit S. That sets a key. Okay. At frame 1, I want this dude here. So I hit S. He's there. At frame 60, so I move my time slider up to 60. I move him across. I hit S. All right, so that is how we set up some basic keyframes. Now, we hit S, right, to set a key, and look at our channel box. You see how all that other stuff is red also, okay? So as an animator, we need to work on efficiency, right? When we hit S on any object, it's going to set keyframes for every single thing. All of these other items have not been animated. We still have keyframes for them. So when we go to something like the graph editor, we're going to see a big cluster. Just so you can see it, I'm going to click the graph editor. Look at all this stuff in here. Okay, it's a lot of stuff that we really don't need. It's only 3 things, but there's actually other stuff kind of hidden inside here. It's just extra stuff. Okay, so this one we're cool with hitting S. Next one that we do, we're going to be using a more efficient way to set keyframes. Okay, so I want to shrink my work area. Right now I have 250 frames. When I hit play, I see 60, and then there is nothing happening after that for a long time. Okay, so that's what this little guy here is for. If you grab this and shrink it, look how we can zoom into that little area. Okay, so don't shrink it all the way, but maybe to like 70-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect, just around 70. I like to make sure I have a little bit of time to process what I just saw, so I leave a couple extra frames at the end. Cool. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to change how this animation is playing out. Okay. So right now, remember my tangents are set to automatic. Okay, which means that Maya is going to pick whatever one it feels like picking, I guess. I'm going to go to the graph editor again. So go to your graph editor button with the sphere selected. Yes, ma'am. All right. So in the graph editor, you'll see that there's a bunch of stuff in here. Especially for newbies to animation, especially to Maya's animation, it's going to be completely crazy to look at this stuff, okay? So the least amount of stuff we can have in here, the better. I would agree. You would agree? Yes, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab all the stuff that's not important to us. So like the translate X and Y, in my case, because those aren't animated. And then the other ones below that. And I'm going to right click and delete those keyframes from that. So I only have keyframes on the actual item that I animated. Okay. So now we're only looking at the one item. Okay, so that makes it a lot simpler because we don't have to see all these other lines and stuff like going all over the place. Now looking at this, if you had After Effects before, okay, we dealt with the speed graph, right? That was something that we typically played with. The speed graph was basically make this go faster, and you would just drag this little thing over, all right? The other graph that's in After Effects is the value graph. That's what we're looking at here. It's showing us a visual representation of what Translate Z is doing. So at the very top left of my graph, that's where it starts. So that's my 0 point. If I'm not sure, I can marquee that point, and it'll say at frame 1, this ball is at 0. Okay, the Translate Z is at 0. If I marquee this point, at frame 60, the ball is at negative 2394. I can actually read it better here than I can there. It's incredibly small on my screen. Okay, now the way that this graph is going is it's kind of like, it's not a straight line, right? It's kind of like soft at the top and soft at the bottom. So this would be the equivalent in After Effects of an easy ease. It eases out and then it eases in. Okay, that's what it's doing. If I, scoot this over. If I grab this whole graph right here and I click this straight one, now it's linear. So this is After Effects default, which means that there's going to be no acceleration. Which means it's basically going to go from A to B. That's all it's going to do. It's just going to go straight across. No slow down, no speed up at all. Some of these you'll find have the exact same appearance. So as I start clicking these other options that are available, you'll see that there's not a huge difference in some of these. Okay? It's not until we get 3, 4, 5 keyframes where our values are changing that some of these will play more of a role. Okay? I'm going to point out a couple of them. So one of them is flat. That's what this one is. What flat does is make sure that we don't go past any of the keyframes. Okay? Now, if we were to have a, scoot that there for a second. You don't need to do this. I'm just going to do this so you can see what it's going to do. I'm going to set a key here. I'm going to go there, set a key there. Okay. All right. So this is flat. So you can see how this is easing out of that keyframe, easing into the next one. It's nice and flat, and it comes up and goes into the next keyframe. Nice and smooth all over. Okay, that's flat. If I were to set this to spline, look at how it changed it. Okay, do you see how even though these two keyframes right here at the bottom, those are about the same values, but what Maya does is try to keep a nice smooth transition from all the keyframes. Okay. If we go to linear, it's straight. Boom, 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 boom. If we go to plateau, this is going to look very similar to flat. Okay. The idea with these is that they're starting points. That's all they are. I never use those as like the last time I'm going to touch my stuff, because as I start adding one, I use it as just a, here's where I'm going to start, and then I start tweaking things from there. Okay? So I'm just going to delete my other keyframes. I can delete stuff in there by using the delete key. Okay? All right. So let's take this and let's manipulate this. So what we want to do is have this start off pretty slow and then go super fast. Okay? So if we wanted to move something inside of our viewport, what tool would we be in? What was that? W, the move tool, right? So same thing here. If we want to move something in the graph editor, we'll be in the move tool. I want to move this handlebar here. Just like in Illustrator, I have a handlebar, right? Just like the pen tool. I'm going to do two things. This is where it's kind of tricky. You have to marquee the keyframe, marquee the handlebar, and then use your middle mouse to move it. Okay? So marquee your point, marquee the handlebar, and then middle mouse button, drag it so it looks like mine. So I would marquee this, and I would try to marquee it again, and it would actually just like move the point. Okay? If it happens, you hit undo, try marqueing again, maybe from a bit further away. All right? So let's look and see what mine looks like. I'm gonna shrink this back down. Okay, starts off pretty slow and then boom, speeds up super quick. Now notice that there's no like slowing down at the end, right? So it's not like a car, maybe a car hitting a building, but not like a car that's decelerating or braking. It just like stops. Okay? And that's apparent right here because we don't have that lower end. We don't have that easing out. So eventually you'll get to the point where this is going to make more sense than actually animating in your scene because you know what it's going to do. The high-end animators, the people who do this for a living, they'll animate in here, and then when they're done, they'll go look at the results, where we're kind of working back and forth, right? All right, so now we can do that the other way too. So if I grab these handlebars and I move them the other way, I can make it go very fast at first and then go really slow. All right, so what to be careful of. When we set a keyframe here and we set a keyframe here, we're setting basically the extremes of the movement, all right? When we look at this graph, we typically don't want it to go past these extremes. So if I were to take this, I'm going to be really extreme with this and went like that, and I took this one and I went like that, okay? So what's going to happen here is the ball is going to go past one extreme, go down, go past the other extreme, and then come back to where I want it to be, okay? So I know what this is going to look like. Think about it for a second. It's going to go backwards, go forward, go past the point, and then come back, okay? Okay, because it's going past this point here and that point there. All right, so I need to make sure that as I create these, that I'm moving it. You may not have to marquee. They may have fixed it. Look at that. I can just marquee this point and then click and drag. Holy cow. They actually fixed something. Yeah, you can click that too. Grabbing both of them at the same time is amazing. I don't know what's happening there. I'm just going to go back to marqueing. There we go. Okay, so make sure that these points, the curves themselves, do not go past the extreme. Now where this gets tricky is when we're something like this. Because it definitely doesn't look like I'm past that extreme, but I'm not zoomed in enough to see. That's why you need to make sure that this graph editor is big enough to see the whole thing, and you hit F so that you're framed. Now you may want to zoom out like this. So you can see when I'm zoomed this way, I can definitely see that I'm going past it some. Alt Shift and right mouse button up and down will zoom you just up and down. Right mouse button left and right will zoom you just left and right. Okay, so now I can adjust that there. Okay, so make it fast at first and then slow. Alright, so now we have something that starts off fast and moves slow. Now, what do you think is the common thread here for something that's moving fast? What should the graph look like? On a slant, right? So typically if you see something moving fast, it's going to be more vertical than horizontal. So what's something slow going to do? The other way. Right? So as you look at any graph, look at the direction of stuff. So looking at this, I don't even need to see what you're animating. I know that whatever you're animating is going to go fast at the start, and it's going to go really slow, okay, at the end. So all of this stuff is things that we'll be constantly playing with. Even something like this, slow at the beginning, fast in the middle, slow at the end, okay? Now, one thing we can do inside of Illustrator and Photoshop and all those with the pen tool, we can stretch those handlebars out, right? We haven't done that yet. I've stretched it, it doesn't do anything. For whatever reason, they like to lock things a lot, okay? So if you marquee your entire graph and you go to Curves, Weighted Tangents, and then you go to Tangents, Free Tangent Weight, then you can actually stretch these out. So now you can make something that is extremely slow at the beginning and end, and really fast in the middle. Curves, weighted tangents, and then tangents, free tangent weight. So make yours extreme. Alright, so you can see how extreme mine is. We have 60 frames, okay? So there's only so far we can actually push this before it just doesn't work, right? So if I push this even further this way, and I grab this one, and I push it even further that way, you can see it's looking good still, maybe a little bit too much. If I keep pushing it, and I keep pushing it, eventually I'll hit this point where it's just like, nope, like right there. See, it's not moving anymore. Just no, can't do that. Okay? So be aware of that too. Now that's one way that we can change the speed of our item. Okay? By adjusting the graph. When you animate something, keep in mind when you want stuff to happen. At this point I want the ball here, at this point I want the ball here, at this point I want the ball there. Those things are pretty consistent. Okay? The next part of that is the graph editor of how fast it's going to get from point A to point B to point C. Okay? If we had a third point in there, the ball, let's say, comes up, then we would have to make sure that we consider how it's coming up and how it's moving and making sure all the graphs look nicely blended together. 2 points is easy. 3, 4, 20, 30 points, that's where it gets more difficult. Okay? So let's step back and figure out how we can adjust where these keyframes are happening. All right, so I'm going to close the graph editor. And we're going to go to the dope sheet. So if you lost it, Window Animation Editor's dope sheet, or you can just go to your DS in the channel box. Okay, the dope sheet is probably the most boring thing to look at. It literally just lists all your keyframes. Okay, they're really easy to see. They're just, if I click on my sphere in here, there are those two yellow tacks at each point, right? If we did a character, this thing would be loaded up with keyframes. Now, the easy way to do this is the top one here in the blue is like a summary. That's why they call it the dope sheet summary. If I had 12 items selected, they're all lined up, I want to move them all. Instead of grabbing each one, I can just grab that top blue one and move just that top blue one. And it'll move all of them together. Okay? So that's an easy way to grab all the items you have selected there and move them in one. We only have one item here, so either way it doesn't matter. We click on that keyframe, and then we middle drag, and we can just move it to wherever we want. So much easier than the timeline, we can just grab keyframes and move them as needed. So if I take this and move it to 30, is the ball going to go faster or slower? Faster, right? Less frames, same distance, it's going to go faster. That's lightning speed. Okay? Now, as I do this, what's going to happen is my graph is also updating. Okay? So if I had this crazy thing like I had a second ago, and then I push these keyframes together, that's going to make that even more extreme. Okay? So typically the workflow is setting our keyframes, dope sheeting our keyframes to make sure they look good, and final stage would be the graph editor. And then we may have to tweak some stuff here and there, but it shouldn't be too drastic. Okay? So grab a keyframe and scoot it over. Click on it with the left mouse, middle click and drag with the, or click and drag with the middle mouse to move it. And just offset it, I don't care where. I'm going to take this animation and I'm going to bake it out. Okay? We typically say baking for later, but I think it's probably a good time, especially because sometimes we are going to be going into other programs with these, especially until we get RenderMan up and running. So what baking will do is, instead of guessing where the keyframes are or where the transitions are, it'll actually write out the information per frame. Okay? So at frame 1 it's here, 2 it's here, 3 it's here, 4 it's here, and so on. Alright? So pretending that this is perfect, it's not perfect. It is a playing exercise, right? Or learning. I'm going to go to Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation, and see how we have a little box here. This is an option box. So now we can go into this option box and we can check out some of these options and set some stuff. So Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation, option box. Okay. I want to set my Translate Z as the only thing that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to click on the Translate Z, make sure that just Translate Z, in my case, because that's what I animated, is blue. And then in my option box here, I'm going to say from channel box. And what else? Okay, I click Z. What was that? No, if we were to do all keyable, it would actually write keyframes out for the Translate X, Translate Y. We don't animate them, so we're not needed. They're not needed. Now, let's say we did bring this into something like KeyShot, and KeyShot freaked out. Then we would do it just to make sure. Okay. Now we're going to do start and end. We don't need keyframes for the entire timeline. We just need it from where we start and where we end. I like to have a little bit of a buffer in there in case I decide to go past it, right? So if our animation is 30 frames, I'm going to go to 40 frames. So I'm going to say start at 0, sure, give us a little bit of starting time, and then end at 40. Okay, and then when I'm done with that, so all we've changed is from channel box, we've clicked the value, start and end, and say bake. Okay. Now what that did is it baked the keyframes. If you look in your timeline now, do you see all of those keyframes that we have down there? Okay. Same exact animation. There shouldn't be any change at all to the animation. It's just now baked in. All right. So if I was to open up KeyShot, I could import my model into KeyShot, and then I would be able to render it out inside of KeyShot if I wanted to. Okay. We're not going to do that right now with this project. The reason I wanted to do that because I want to show you something else. So if I go to the dope sheet now, so you can go to your dope sheet now and click on your object and look at those keyframes. Right? If you click on your sphere, do you see how many keyframes we now have in that list? Right? If we go to the graph editor, you can just look at mine. You can see all the keyframes that are now in the graph editor. Okay? So this is baking it in. This locks in every single one of those keyframes to a position. Now, typically you would do this before going into another package or before you render out in certain instances. Okay? It doesn't have to happen all the time, but certain instances you'd want that. The reason we did it is I want to show another function of the dope sheet. So if I click on my P-sphere up here and grab all these keyframes, you remember how we can hold down the middle mouse button with the move tool and move all these keyframes? Right? So what do you think would happen if I went to the scale tool? Yep, it lets me actually scale out the keyframes. Okay, so what it's doing is it's taking all of these keyframes, we have, I don't know, 30 of them there, and it stretches out those keyframes. Okay, so I hit the scale tool, I'm grabbing just this end point, and now I can scale this out. Alright, so like I said, in this case we really wouldn't want to do a baking and then stretching these keyframes out on this type of object because we already had those. If we did our entire bouncing ball animation, we have the ball on the ground, it's up in the air, it's back on the ground, it's rolling, it's stretching, it's doing all this stuff. For that, we could grab it and stretch this thing out. We don't have to bake it ahead of time, I just baked it so I get more keyframes. We would just stretch out the keyframes. You can also grab sections and stretch those out too, okay? Now, the other spot that we can adjust stuff, the dope sheet is wonderful. If I'm animating something, the dope sheet is on this monitor, the graph sheet is on this monitor, so I have them like side by side. Typically that's how I like to work when I animate stuff. Sometimes I like to animate stuff right inside the timeline, okay? So one of the cool things about Cinema, you can grab any keyframe and move it wherever you want. That is a wonderful feature. Not have it in Maya. It sucks. What are you gonna do? Alright, so down here where we have our keyframes, if you hold Shift, you can make a temporary selection of your keyframes and move them around. Okay? So this is not a portfolio piece. We don't care what the end result is going to look like. We just want to test out these features. Okay? So don't worry about overlapping stuff and it looking odd. Don't worry about that. So I'm going to hold Shift and I'm going to left click and drag down here. And do you see how I now have selected in red all of these keyframes? There's 4 arrows on here. There's a left arrow on the left side, a right arrow on the right side, and one of each right at the center. Okay? The left arrow on the left side will stretch it to the left or shrink it from the left. The right side will stretch it. The middle one will move it. Okay? And as we start stretching and more keyframes get in that box, they will come along for the ride too. Typically you don't do that, but for this we don't care. Okay? So give that a go. You're going to get something funky afterwards. Just to test it out, right. So if I'm in here and I shift left click, it's updating my time as I go. If I shift middle click, it doesn't update my time at all. Okay? Now the reason for that is that some things we just don't want to update the time. If we have a character animation, clicking and dragging could take forever for that animation to update. So we hold down shift, we left click and drag, and it's like, it takes forever for it to update all these frames. So we would shift middle click, grab what we want, and do what we need with it. Now, with that selection, we can do other stuff too. So it's not just shrinking and stretching and moving stuff. You could actually right click in there and just say delete, and it'll delete whatever's highlighted in red. Okay, so if you have a section you're just not happy with, you can just grab that section and delete it. And the same thing, if you have a section you are happy with, you can right click on it and copy it. And if you copy something, then we know that we can probably go somewhere else and paste it. Okay, so if we do find something, we're like, hey, this is cool how this works, I want to copy that function. I have a cuckoo clock, right, and I want this bird to come out and do its thing every so often. I can just copy that entire animation, come down here, paste it again, and paste it again. Okay, what else can we do in here? Let's do a play blast. All right, so we don't know, I'm going to close my dope sheet. It's exciting, isn't it? What that's doing. Let me just delete some stuff here so I actually have something to preview. There we go. I'm just going to delete all this stuff. That's perfect. Alright, so I don't care what you have on your screen, we're just going to do a little play blast. Alright, so remember I said when we were looking at the preferences that we have the ability to see stuff as fast as it can play it back, but it's going to cap it at 30 frames per second, right? So how do we know that we're even getting to 30 frames a second to know if we're playing super slow? We don't, all right? So if this animation per frame is taking longer than 30 frames per second to play back, that means that we're not getting a real-time playback, which means that we're going to run into the other thing where it looks good in screen, we take it into After Effects, and now it happens super fast, okay? Because of how slow we think it was going. So we do a play blast. A play blast basically takes a screenshot of this entire animation, and then it shows us it in like a QuickTime viewer, okay? That way we can see how fast is it actually going. So there's two ways you can get to this. Under Window, Animation Editors, Play Blast. Is it there? No, it used to be there. They moved it. Scoundrels. All right. There's oh, there it is. Play Blast right there. Windows Play Blast. Okay. So you can get to it through there. I just right click on the timeline and go to Play Blast option box. Okay. So right click on the timeline, Play Blast option box. Do not use the default settings. The default settings are horrible. I don't know why they're the default. They've never been good enough quality. So I want to change my format to image. I want to change the encoding right below that to Maya. And where it says scale, I want to set that to 1. Okay? So image, Maya, scale is set to 1. Those are the perfect settings for this. Then you can hit Play Blast. And what should happen is it should open this program called FCheck. FCheck is going to show you what it actually looks like in real time. Now, let's say you have a super slow computer. You do an FCheck on something. It still isn't playing back in real time. That's a possibility. You probably need to like reboot the computer, clear some stuff out. The way you would know it is right here. Do you see the little red writing at the very top? So 30 frames per second is where we want this to be. And if you look at yours, it's probably bouncing around between 29 something and 30 something. Okay, it's probably within a good enough range where this is about where you want it to be. Okay, so we know that that's pretty accurate. Now the cool thing is you can also test out other things. You can say, this looks good, but what would happen if it was just a little bit faster, right? So let's say I played this back at 50 frames a second. Now I can preview this and see what it would look like at 50 frames a second. Now the reason for that is we don't know, okay? Especially as a beginning animator, you don't know how fast something should go. So initially we're going to be using our best guesses, okay? You're going to be getting guidance from me as to how long something should take from A to B to C, but you may want to tweak stuff. You may want to see how things are going to happen. Eventually, you're going to be animating your own things. So you have to explore, and you have to do these little tests to see. Maybe this is too fast. Let's see what it looks like at 20. Okay, looks kind of blocky, but it may work for what I wanted to do, right? So don't be afraid to do play blasts very often. Typically what I will do if I'm animating something, if I have to use the restroom, hit the play blast button, go visit the restroom. By the time I come back, it's already up and running and I can preview it and see where I'm at. You don't want to wait until you're ready to render before you do a play blast. Because what's going to happen is that's basically like after you've done everything else. You've lined up all your animation. In some cases, uh-oh.